An anti-Second Amendment has already appeared. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is another declaration of truth from your host, Terry A. Hurlbut. And right away, I owe you all an apology and an explanation. A week and a half ago, on the same day that I reported on the lightning strike on the Georgia Guidestones, I fell ill, very seriously ill. Then exactly 1 week ago today, I had every reason to believe that I would be over it soon. If any of you have had the plain old garden variety flu, you know what I'm talking about. Well, hang it. The next morning, I tried to clean up for the first time in 3 days and ended up taking 2 hard falls in my bathroom. Ouch! So I had to wait until I had recovered enough strength. It has taken me 6.5 days to get to looking this good, and I'll make no bones about it, I'm still hurting. So if you see me wince, you'll know why. Bear with me, ladies and gentlemen. In the immortal words of actor Sterling Hayden as General Jack D. Ripper in Dr. Strangelove, you don't think I would make such a monumental effort to get out a declaration of truth even if I was not at my best, if it wasn't pretty darn important, do you? Any of you? Alright. Of course not. So listen carefully, and let's see if we can't all stay on the ball. Now, back to that phrase, anti-Second Amendment. And when you see a phrase like that, you might think it just stands for someone who disputes the Second Amendment. Excuse me. Maybe the person doesn't believe in the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Well, if that's all that it could ever mean, that concept would be dangerous enough. Those of us who love human liberty must impress on our fellow citizens the need to preserve all the natural rights of human beings. The right of the people to keep and bear arms is more fundamental than the rest because it guarantees all the rest. But 1 weekend ago, that phrase took on a new meaning. Someone actually proposed an amendment to repeal and replace the Second Amendment. Call it the anti-Second Amendment, in the sense of a thing someone has offered in place of something else. As such, it represents a clear and present danger to all freedom-loving Americans, and therefore I cannot sit back and allow the proponent of that joint resolution to try to make real for himself the maxim of Mohandas Gandhi. He said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. Well, I'm going to skip right to the fighting stage. I have the full text of that disaster of an amendment, and we're going to analyze it section by section. And when I'm through, you'll know what's wrong with it and what I expect you to do about it. Before I go any further, I do want to shout out to the sponsor of this channel, which is Conservative News and Views. Link in the description. Be sure to check out the awesome CNAV Store. Scroll down near the bottom for that link. Lots of great merchandise there, including this t-shirt that I selected for today. Basically, it means that as long as we're redefining everything, a gun becomes a cordless hole punch. And that's as much levity as I can allow tonight. So sit down and let me have your undivided attention. I can assure you this is nothing as trivial or old hat as fluoridation of water. The author of this constitutional atrocity and monstrosity is Michael Moore. Yes, that Michael Moore. No doubt you remember him as the executive producer, if he rates that highfalutin title, of such titles as Roger and Me and Planet of the Humans. Well, a week ago, he tweeted out a link to the complete text of his anti-Second Amendment. I've left a link in the description of to that tweet and to the landing page for what he calls the 28th Amendment. But since it is rather hazardous to start numbering constitutional amendments before they pass, let's just call it the anti-Second Amendment. And now I'm going to read you the whole thing out loud from start to finish. So you all just sit back, pay attention, and take notes. Section 1. The inalienable right of a free people to be kept safe from gun violence and the fear thereof must not be infringed and shall be protected by the Congress and the states. This amendment thus repeals and replaces the Second Amendment. Section 2. Congress shall create a mandatory system of firearm registration and licensing for the following limited purposes. A. License hunters of game. B. License ranges for the sport of target shooting. And C. For the few who can demonstrate a special need for personal protection. All who seek a firearm will undergo a strict vetting process with a thorough background check, including the written and confidential approval of family members, spouses and ex-spouses, and or partners and ex-partners, co-workers, and neighbors. A mental health check will also be required. There will be a waiting period of 1 month to complete the full background check. Section 3. Those who meet all the requirements for the restricted gun owners groups and successfully pass the background check must take a firearm safety class and pass a written test on an annual basis. Section 4. The minimum age for the restricted groups who can own a firearm is 25 years old. Renewal and review of the firearms license will occur on an annual basis. Section 5. Congress will stipulate and continually update the limited list of approved firearms for civilian use, including weapons in the future that are not yet invented. The following firearms are heretofore banned: all automatic and semi-automatic weapons and all devices which can enable a single shotgun to fire automatically or semi-automatically, any weapon that can hold more than 6 bullets or rounds at a time, and any magazine that holds more than 6 bullets, all guns made of plastic or any homemade equipment and machinery, or a 3D printer that can make a gun or weapon that can take a human life. Section 6. Congress shall regulate all ammunition, capacity of ammunition, the storage of guns, gun locks, gun sights, body armor, and the sale and distribution of such items. No weapon of any kind whose sole intention is the premeditated elimination of human life are considered legal. Congress may create future restrictions, as this amendment specifically does not grant any American the right to own any weapon. Section 7. Police who are trained and vetted to use firearms shall be subject to comprehensive and continuous monitoring and shall be dismissed if found to exhibit any racist or violent behavior. Section 8. Not to be confused with the part of military regulations covering discharge from an armed service by reason of being non-compos mentis. Persons already owning any of the above banned firearms and who do not fall into the legal groups of restricted firearms owners will have 1 month from the ratification of this amendment to turn in their firearms for destruction by local law enforcement. These local authorities may organize a gun buyback program to assist in this effort. Well, would you just look at this anti-Second Amendment? Never mind the pidlet stuff, the sloppy turns of phrase such as Congress shall create instead of Congress shall have the power to create. That's incidental. Just look at its effects. It checks off all the boxes for someone afraid not only of his own shadow, but the shadows of his fellow Americans. Mr. Moore surprises me by this bit of honesty or brass. He doesn't even use the word freedom anywhere. Instead, he speaks of safety. Note also his passive verb construct in section 1. But he makes the obvious mistake. A free people never stands on a right to be kept safe. Recall what Benjamin Franklin said about liberty and safety. Quote, "Those who would sacrifice essential liberty in order to purchase a bit of temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety, unquote Benjamin Franklin. Now, in obvious false generosity, Mr. Moore offers to allow people other than law enforcement to bear weapons for 1. Wild game hunting with the usual sort of license one has today, 2. Target practice on a range, and 3. Serving a special need for personal protection. Do you recognize that last turn of phrase? I do. It's a direct nod to the New York State May issue law that the Supreme Court of the United States recently struck down. New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. Now, I covered that last month. The rest of Section 2 consists of the ultimate red flag law, a preemptive red flag. Note carefully, confidential approval. That supersedes the Sixth Amendment right to face one's accuser. Sections 3 and 4 round out this not quite privileged class. The minimum age for owning any firearm rises to 25. The two sections redundantly require every licensee to renew every year, and the red flag hit can happen in any year. I'm going to interrupt this briefing here to shout out to another sponsor, BitNext. This is your replacement for Zoom, Slack, the Google G Suite, Microsoft Office 365, Dropbox, WeTransfer, and Chili Piper, among others. Unlike any of them, BitNext protects your content and conversations so well that even the administrators can't see it. So this is your channel for secure comms, conferencing, cloud storage, and file sharing. Best of all, everything is back-end, so you don't even need client software. If you have a browser, you can use BitNext. Follow the link and give them a try. You get 28 days free of charge. And you can take that from me. Its value is beyond price. Now then, back to the briefing. Sections 5 and 6 are the future-proofers. Moore wants his anti-Second Amendment to cover any weapons anyone might invent, past, present, or future. But out of the gate, he makes 3 kinds of bans. Senator Dianne Feinstein of California, if she still has the mental capacity to read his submission, must be heartwarmed. The ban list includes all automatic and semi-automatic weapons. Bear this in mind whenever anyone offers to distinguish between them. Michael Moore does not, and he is only the latest to be brazen enough not to, which is why I hold that a free individual may arm himself at least as well as, if not better than, an infantry soldier. The only guns that would remain legal, as the Blaze points out, are 6-shot revolvers, bolt-action rifles, and single-shot or double-barreled shotguns. Note that Moore also would ban any improved equipment or technology that would let someone be his own gunsmith. That includes the additive manufacturing device you might have heard people call a 3D printer. Nor does it stop with guns. Naturally, it continues to ammunition, magazines, body armor, in short, all the things the left doesn't want civilians to have. The last clause in Section 6 makes the point as plain as day. I quote, "This amendment specifically does not grant any American the right to own any weapon." Unquote. Now, I hear you ask, but what about law enforcement and the military? What about them? Moore presumes the worst motives, so all police must submit to comprehensive and continuous monitoring and be dismissed if found to exhibit racist or violent behavior. That last might present a problem. Perhaps Mr. Moore never learned that the National Rifle Association began with a charter to arm the new freedmen after the war between the states. But the biggest problem with this anti-Second Amendment is the magical thinking that underlies it. Section 8, and maybe this section is aptly named after all, provides that all persons not qualifying to own firearms have a month to turn them in. Local enforcement then has the task of destroying them. Psychologist Jeffrey Miller tweeted a reasonable question that addresses this magical thinking. I've left a link to it in the description, but I'm also going to quote him here. Such a cute effort. Good virtue signaling, Michael. And pray tell, how exactly would you confiscate the 200 million plus firearms that are legally owned by U.S. citizens that would suddenly violate your cute amendment without provoking a civil war? Unquote Jeffrey Miller. Well, how indeed. It sounds absurd, doesn't it? But you don't think someone would propose this kind of absurdity if he didn't fully expect somebody to work out the details, do you? For every absurd idea, there's always somebody with a dark enough heart to work out a way to make it happen. You can imagine Klaus Schwab leaning back in his swivel chair and drawling in that broken German accent of his, "We have ways." And you can bank on this. If an amendment like this gets 2/3 of both houses of Congress and 3/4 of the several states, then we've already lost 75% of state police forces, with the possible exception of Hawaii. In case you're wondering, Hawaii 5-0 was always a myth. The premise of that 12-season television show on the Columbia Broadcasting System was always, suppose someone could make it happen. But I digress. Someone else observed that Section 5 would outlaw virtually every machine tool that exists. No need to quote that again. I've left a link in the description. And now I hear you ask again, would the Anti-Second Amendment ever pass? Listen to me carefully. We cannot complacently assume that no such thing would ever pass. The history of anti-freedom amendments like this Anti-Second Amendment does not hold promise. James G. Blaine, don't forget, persuaded up to 38 states to pass anti-religious amendments to their own constitutions. Louisiana repealed theirs in 1974. The Supreme Court itself gave us a slew of unhealthy precedents over the decades. True, the court has now overruled many of these precedents, but others remain, including this one directly relevant to Michael Moore's purposes, U.S. versus Miller, 1939. Now all of you within range of my voice, take a good look at me. Do I look like I'm laughing? No. I am not laughing at Michael Moore. The most dangerous thing often comes in ridiculous-looking passages, and that goes double for Michael Moore. Miller's lawyers laughed at the National Firearms Act of 1934. They said, Supreme Court will never uphold such a blatantly unconstitutional law. How wrong they were. Miller is a precedent by default because no one argued against it. The only reason we have a Supreme Court as friendly to constitutional liberties as this one is that freedom lovers painstakingly sought to change its membership over time. Appointing Clarence Thomas was part of it. But so were the appointment of Sam Alito instead of Harriet Miers, and the appointments of Justices Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. But a thing like this would override any Supreme Court precedent. So we do not blindly let a thing like that go to the states on the theory that it would fall short of ratification. They did that with a proposed amendment that would have erased all practical and legal distinction between men and women. And we all heard the lobster trap theory, that no state legislature, having ratified a proposed amendment to the Constitution, may ever rescind that ratification. So we mustn't let this amendment go to the states. We head it off at the pass. And then watch out. Look for Michael Moore, just like James G. Blaine, to lay his amendment before every state in the Union. Even one state that passes this monstrosity is one state too many. Now thus far, the site GovTrack doesn't have House or Senate joint resolution numbers for the Anti-Second Amendment. Yet, Y-E-T, yet. Now there's a word that ought to strike you as fraught with peril. Michael Moore said he has submitted his proposal to Congress, so there's no reason to suppose that it never will. With that in mind, I want you all to grow eyes under the backs of your heads. I want you to call your senators and representatives and tell them that you expect them, in accordance with their oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to vote no on any HJ-Res or SJ-Res that has any section or preamble that in any manner resembles any of the text I read to you tonight. Links in the description to the article, to Michael Moore's tweet, to the landing page containing the text of his anti-Second Amendment, to the 2 tweets I've cited in reaction, and to Conservative News and Views. I have another link to the awesome online store and to BitNext, as I also mentioned. And if you like what you've heard, you can like this video. And on the YouTube end screen, I'm going to put in a subscribe link and also a link to my Second Amendment playlist. This is Terry A. Hurlbut delivering another declaration of truth and reminding you to let the truth set you free.